Give a man a purpose and the ability to achieve it, and he will crawl over broken glass with a smile.
Every issue you have with yourself and others, for the most part, will be resolved and taken care of when you have a true north. You have a stake in the ground that you're marching towards.
Be scared, but do not, under any circumstance, let it stop you from trying.
The expression of that fear, the sharing of it, the communication through honesty that you just mentioned is what frees you from it.
Welcome to the show. Thank you for taking part in this immersive listening experience. A meaningful existence is a moving target that, no matter how close, will always be out of reach. We hope this message finds you with an outstretched hand. As we attempt to uncover complex truths, remember, life's toughest questions can be answered if we all just focus on one thing: being good people.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Good People, episode 22. Today, I was joined by Athan Schindler. This is actually his second time on the podcast. He is the owner of Bastrop Fitness Project in Bastrop, Texas, just outside of Austin. The format of today's episode is a little different than we've done in the past. I compiled a whole bunch of quotes from the internet. I read them to him, and then we talked about them. And it was so diverse that you'll just have to listen to the full episode. If you are watching on YouTube, please like, comment, and subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our weekly uploads. Enjoy the show. All right, Athan, man, welcome back to the show. This is your second time on. Fun fact before we start, you're the first person that's ever doing a second appearance on Good People, I think for good reason, but welcome back.
Thank you. Yeah, I was excited that you reached out and asked me to be back on the show, and I had so much fun the first time, so I think we're going to have a blast this time too.
And another fun fact is this is episode 22 for us, which puts us in the top 1% of all podcasts ever. And I remember when you and I met, I had recorded I think 3 episodes of my podcast or 4. And I remember having this conversation with you, like, dude, we're just trying to get to episode 22. And
you specifically said this was the goal.
Yeah. And so it's kind of a cool full circle moment to have you on for this 22nd episode.
What an honor. Thank you.
I don't even know if that's true. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't even know if we're in the top 1%. I just heard it one time on another podcast, and I've just kind of ran with that idea, but I'm taking it.
It makes sense. I know a lot of people who do podcasts who get about, 8 episodes in and just stop. So it follows logic for me.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Everybody starts a podcast and they're like, never mind.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
Yeah. Well, this format is going to be a little bit different. I think you were on episode 13. I may be getting that wrong. But anybody listening, if you haven't listened to that one, go check it out. It was an awesome episode. That was actually one of the first episodes that I did that I felt kind of confident in. And I'm pretty hard on myself for the most part in a lot of ways. But I remember going away from that, like, that was a good episode. Like, I know that was a good episode.
Yeah, I remember catching up with you after, and you'd said like you'd been working on some of your skills, and you felt like you were really getting some traction there. Yeah,
well, hopefully other people think the same, but we'll see.
Hey, I'm a listener. I think you're doing great. I love your content. I love your shows. So I'm giving you the big thumbs up.
Well, thanks for saying that. But this format is going to be different than anything we've ever done before. I've compiled a list of a whole bunch of quotes. Some of them are reading, mindset, philosophy, in line with a lot of the stuff that we do on this show, what it is to be a good person. Some of them are more creative and others are more harsh and in the productivity space. And you actually don't know the quotes that I've compiled, but I'm going to read them to you, and then you're going to sort of give me your thoughts on them. And at the very least, I hope it just sort of inspires a good conversation. I might say the first quote, and then I never read another quote because we might just talk for an hour about
this is my favorite thing to do is just kind of like riff off of concepts and theories and philosophy and stuff. So I think this will be a fun episode.
Yeah. So fun fact, I got these from a bunch of places. Some of them I actually dug deep into your Instagram and I found them.
Nice.
Some of them might jog memories for you, but we'll see. This first one is actually the longest one that I'm going to read. It's a story or quote from Ram Dass. I think you actually posted this like a screenshot from the internet in like 2016 or something, and I just found it.
Nice.
And I wanted to read it because I think it's a great story. A little preface before I say it is I had a lady, Amy Wren, on. She studies spiritual but not religious community, and she recommended everybody to listen to This Is Water by David Foster Wallace. That's one of my favorite pieces.
So
and when I
good.
read this, it reminded me a lot of that. And so the quote is, when you go out into the woods and you look at trees, you see all these different trees. And some of them are bent, and some of them are straight, and some of them are evergreens, and some of them are whatever. And you look at the tree and you allow it. You see why it is the way it is. You sort of understand that it didn't get enough light, and so it turned that way. And you don't get all emotional about it. You just allow it. You appreciate the tree. The minute you get near humans, you lose all that. And you are constantly saying, you're to this or I'm to this. That judging mind comes in. And so I practice turning people into trees, which means appreciating them just the way they are.
Yeah, man. I got a little emotional while you were reading that. It's one of my favorite quotes. Man, just because it's so true, right? I mean, isn't it so true that like how hard we are on people, on human beings? You know, you're okay with a lot of other things, and then we just look at human beings for some reason, and we expect something perfect or more or better or whatever. Insert the judgment. So, yeah.
Reading this reminded me a lot of, we judge ourselves by our intentions and others by their actions. And it's just like, whether we treat others like we treat ourselves or we treat ourselves like we treat others, there's a inconsistency there. So that's why that sort of struck a chord with me. And I knew that you posted it, which is why I wanted to sort of start us off that way.
Yeah, it's something. I'm not surprised that you pulled that from like 2016. I was big time into Ram Dass at that time. I had also just listened to his lectures on Be Here Now, the original lectures that kind of led to his book Be Here Now, and man, it just hit me so hard. And I think we sometimes throw the term like life changing around like a book we read or something like that, but it changed the trajectory of my life. Not that specific quote solely, but just really kind of thinking about reality and like how we walk through the world and how we, what's like really real versus what we perceive as important or real,
Yeah, I think just to touch on that for a second, what you said, where there's things that are life changing. Sometimes it's a summation of a period of time in your life, and you look back and you reflect like, oh, that was the time that I really started to do this, or I started to feel this way about this certain aspect. I feel like I've gone through that recently after my 100-miler. I realized that there's more things that I want to do in life other than like physically hard things. And I can say that like 4-month period after I did my run, where I was really reflecting on what this thing meant for me and what was next. And is it another challenge? Is it not? I feel horrible because I don't want to do anything physical. Like, does that make me a bad person? And I feel like I'm sort of coming out of that, where now I have a better, clear understanding of the things that I want, the things that I want to accomplish. And for a number of reasons, there's a number of people in that time period that, in their teachings, that I can point to and look to as life changing. It wasn't one specific thing. It was that period.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we all have times like that in our lives. Like, and it's hard to, and that's I guess the fun and the joy of life is like the mystery of it. Because going into things, you don't know, you might go into something quote unquote big for you, expecting some sort of major change or transformation or something, and it just doesn't. It just fizzles or whatever. And then there's like other things that just kind of you didn't expect. You went into them maybe haphazardly or whatever, and you don't expect much out of them, and all of a sudden, like, it hits you like a ton of bricks. It like completely. I like to think about it like the the meteor that hit the earth that like basically killed all the dinosaurs and changed, it just changes your entire ecosystem. It rocks your entire world, and you're completely different.
Yeah.
All the time after that.
Next quote is, "The ability to choose cannot be taken away or even given away. It can only be forgotten."
Wow. I have to sit with that one for a minute. Will you read it again?
"The ability to choose cannot be taken away or even given away. It can only be forgotten."
Man, where did that come from?
I have no idea. I think I saw this. I actually think maybe you wrote it.
Wow, really? That's funny. Yeah. I don't know when I would have even written that, but I'm like sitting here thinking about it can only be forgotten. The ability to choose can only be forgotten.
And let me give you my take on it. I think a lot of times people go through their life and things happen and you get to whatever phase. And there's a moment where a lot of people have a surrender point where it's like, I can no longer chase the things that I want to do. And now I'm doing this. I'm working this regular job and I'm in the rat race. Or it can be a number of things, but that's a good example. And when you make the choice that I'm joining the rat race, see you at the end of my life, guys, that in itself is a choice, but you are in a way surrendering your ability to create the life you want, chase the goals you want, things like that. And so it's important to remember, and I think what this quote is getting at is no matter what, if you are breathing, you have the ability to choose the things that you do now and next. And it's important to remember that the only way you won't is if you've forgotten that you have the ability to do so. Sort of getting at, a lot of people say, well, I didn't have a choice, or, how can I afford this or do that? I don't have a choice. At some level, you always have a choice in the matter.
Yeah, I think that's how it hits me too, is that, well, one, it's funny. I watched this movie with my daughter recently, and I think it was called The Choice, and it was a cheesy romantic, whatever movie. But it really talks. What it kind of hit for me, and what I think is really true about life is, all life really is just this series of choices that we make. It's like and like I was talking about, you never know what this next choice is going to lead to next. And knowing that you always have a choice to choose something different, to completely overhaul your life, we're so much stuck in what we considered like this autopilot, or what we were considered like our lot in life, that we forget that we could, this isn't even like a stretch. You could stop everything you're doing right now and completely do everything different. You could in this moment right now say, I'm quitting my job, I'm moving my house, I'm breaking up with this person, and all at once, in one moment, in one choice, and your life can be completely different. And people forget that they have that kind of power.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot recently, in the sense of, I'm a worrier. I've worried about everything my whole life. I'm worried about what I'm going to eat for breakfast tomorrow. I worry.
Yeah.
And I feel, when I think about my future and what I want to accomplish, it makes me anxious. Like, oh my God, this is going to be this much work, and it's got to work out in this way, and I've got to keep doing it for probably this long before I get to see any semblance of results. And that dialogue, though, is actually a comforting thing for me, where I tell myself, I could get to 30, which is 7 years from now, and be nowhere from where I am right now, and I'd still be okay. I could always put a tie on and go to work and sip my coffee and read my newspaper at my desk every morning in my cubicle. Like, that could always happen. And it's almost like a safety net for me.
Yeah. Another way that I think about it, because I wouldn't call myself a worrier, but I have worried about things. And one of the things, I kind of think, I was like, well, I have everyone I know and myself, I have always been okay. Have I been through something hard? Certainly I've had bad days. I've had bad situations happen to me, but I've never not been okay. So why should I worry? Why all of a sudden sometime in the future I'm not going to be okay? It's really not likely.
Yeah. We talked about this last episode you were on where we were talking about preparedness and with like jujitsu and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I said something along the lines of, that's a really deep realization to come to, is when you realize, oh, I've always, to use your words, I've always been okay, you know? And I think about this in the context of AI, where people are worried about AI taking my job or AI doing this. It's like, no matter what happens, no matter how automated things get, if you are alive, you will live your life. If you are living, you will live your life in one way or another. And
Yeah.
so in reality, your experience of the world and earth and breathing isn't really going to change a whole lot.
I mean, yeah, if you look at like even over the past few hundred years and all the technological advances that have happened in the last, let's even say like 100 years, and all the people have worried about those things, but really our lives aren't that much different than a little different, but not a lot different than 100 years ago, you know?
Yeah. Ready for the next one?
I'm ready.
I would like to say before I say this one, this is from me. And I have said probably numerous times in my life that people that quote themselves are the worst people on planet Earth. And so I just don't want this to sound like I'm quoting myself and I'm trying to be super profound. Are you on the app Threads?
No, I see that you are. I see a lot of people I know that are, but I haven't jumped on the train yet.
Okay, it's just like Twitter, but it's Instagram. It's your Instagram account. And this is my favorite app because I think the quality of my thoughts are better than the quality of my face, and so it's a better forum for me. But I use it kind of like a journal of. I've always had a hard time getting in a journaling habit, but throughout the day I'll have this like profound thing hit me or whatever. I think it's profound, and I'll just put it on Threads, and it's literally I don't care if anybody sees it. I just am writing it for me, and this is one of the things that came out of it, and I would love to hear your take on this. There's actually 2 quotes in here that I wrote fairly recently, and I'm excited to hear your take on this. The first one: the more things you accomplish, the more you realize you're no better than anyone else. Confidence, therefore, is acceptance, not capability.
Yeah. Immediately, my first thought on that is like, and you might relate to what I'm about to say. For example, you have done some very elite things that like 1% of the population have done. Like you've run 100 miles.
In my 22nd podcast episode.
That's right. Your 22nd podcast episode. You're doing things that not very many people do. And I've done things like that. I'll take, for example, being an airborne ranger, right? Like that's something that I am consistently kind of, when people find that out about me, people pat me on the back and, say what an accomplishment and whatever they want to say about it. And in my mind, as someone who's accomplished that, and maybe you can relate as to someone who's accomplishing things, I'm like, it wasn't really that hard. Like, honestly, like I showed up, I put in some work. There was a couple tough moments. Like, I struggled with some things, but at the end of the day, I realized in that moment, and being in the Rangers and then being in reconnaissance, I really found myself, that's what was considered like the elite of the elite. And I realized as I looked around the room, like, man, these are just average guys who just work real hard. There's nothing really special about anybody here, and I think that's what that quote is for me. And I hope that empowers people. For me, that's when I'm coaching people and I'm getting them to believe in themselves. It's really that, like what you're building up to be this major accomplishment, to be this achievement. I don't care what it is. The presidents of the United States, our most recent presidents of the United States, you look at them and like, they don't seem particularly special. They just chose a track and they stayed consistent and they kept working and they kept showing up and they achieved that thing, and that's kind of what that makes me think is like, you can do amazing things. You can do things that people only dream of accomplishing if you just realize that it's not really it doesn't take a special person to do it. It takes a committed person to do it.
Yeah, that's a cool spin on it. And for me, it was sort of coming from this place of exactly kind of what you were getting at the beginning, where it's the realization that, oh, these are normal people. I ran, when I did my 100-miler, there was obese people running, not obese. There was overweight people that did and completed it faster than I did. There was like 70-year-old dudes that ran faster than I did. When we were finishing and it was like 4 a.m. and we rounded this lake, and the logging or the log camp that the finish line was at was illuminating over this pond. And we're coming up around the turn, and we run on this gravel road, and then we got to run up this small hill to the finish line. As we get around the lake and we're going up this gravel road, and we hear, all I'm hearing is the sound of my feet hitting the gravel over and over again. And I'm starting to get this smile that I can't not have, because I'm realizing that it's not even just I'm proud of what I'm about to do. It's I'm so happy this is over sort of feeling, right?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I just hear, and the guy that I'm running with, we both hear from behind us, feet like slapping the concrete and gravel harder than I've ever heard anybody run before in my life. And sure enough, there's this short, stubby guy and a guy that probably looked to be about 65 years old, absolutely hauling ass past us towards the finish line. And they literally, I mean, it was probably a 200-yard small uphill sprint, and they were sprinting to the finish, right? And I remember thinking in that moment, like, oh, anybody can do this. Like, it's just, you show up. Did you put in the miles before? Do you have a good plan? Is there people around you that know you well enough to know the difference between when you actually need help and when you're fine to keep going? If yes, you will run 100 miles. That's it. And so whether that is disheartening to some people, to me, it gives me confidence. Like, oh, nobody knows what the hell they're doing. Okay. That gives me an advantage, because I don't know either. But because I know that, like, I'm going to be fine.
Yeah, the majority of people really don't know what they're doing. You know what I mean? And even some of our most successful people, like, I feel fortunate enough to get to hang around some people who've, like, pretty successful people in their career fields and whatnot. And like, when you talk to them, they're like, oh yeah, I don't know. I just kind of like, I don't know. I just kind of stumbled my way through this, and that's definitely been when I've been fearful in my life, like when I've been afraid to achieve something or to put myself out there, and which has happened lots of times in my life. One of the things that calms me down and allows me to kind of get through the threshold of whatever that thing is to say, hey, look, many people have done this before. Probably thousands of people have done this thing that I'm about to do before. So why can't I do it? They can't all be that much more special than me, and that kind of gives me the way to say, like, okay, let me go for it.
Yeah. And I would even argue that there's probably a large chunk of that population that isn't as capable as you are, and they did it.
Right. Oh, going back to my military career, there's some real dumbasses and like, just people who are like, you're like, how the hell did you end up here? So then that also makes me feel bad sometimes. I'm like, oh, well, maybe this isn't the achievement that I thought it was,
Yeah. I would argue to say that feeling of, I've never been over excited about the outcome of something that I accomplished. I've never been like, this is way better than I thought. I've only ever been, this isn't as good as I thought it was going to be.
That's, that's the human. I think that's just being human, because now for 25 years, specifically in the fitness industry, strength conditioning industry, I've been doing it for a really long time. And hands down, I've never met one person that was like satisfied and excited about, very rarely, for a moment, maybe, but it's like, no one's ever happy. No one's ever satisfied with what they're accomplished. And that's like part of the human condition. For some whatever reason, I don't know why that is, but you, like you said, you ran 100 miles, dude. Like, you ran 100 miles at once, and you got done with it and you're like, I'm not happy. I should have done it faster. The old guy passed me, the whatever, it's like, and that's just, I don't know. That's how humans are. It's kind of a frustrating part of being a coach,
Yeah. And I would say too, with that experience, I definitely I wasn't like upset. I knew that that's what it was going to be like. And so to me, it was just acceptance. Like I knew that's how it was going to feel. And I wasn't disappointed. That's how it was going to feel. And there was nothing special about the fact that I did 100 miles or that I did 50 miles or anything else that you could say are quote unquote accomplishments. None of that matters. I enjoyed doing it. It was a cool, hard thing. Okay, now it's time to move on to other exciting projects that get me going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know. It's beautiful and tragic all at the same time.
I'm going to move on to the next one, which is kind of related. This is from Alex Hormozy. Confidence without evidence is delusion.
Confidence without evidence is delusion. I mean, my first thought is I don't agree with that.
I don't either, which is why I'm asking.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I would love to ask him some questions. I'd love to talk to Alex. But what evidence is he talking about? I'm currently reading a book, Dr. Joe Dispenza, a book by him. And what I'm learning through that, and I'm subscribing to the idea, is that really the only way that we ever truly achieve things is that we kind of first have to believe and have the confidence that it's possible, that we can have a new way of being, we can achieve something, we can have something. So I kind of feel like it's almost the opposite, is there's not going to be an achievement or an accomplishment or whatever. I'm not, the confidence to do whatever without first just having the belief and confidence that you can do it,
Yeah, I would say, I think that it comes from the place of like his perspective is confidence equals when people say, I am this. Mm-hmm. I am a hardworking guy with, and I chase excellence in all things. Like, and I'm sure of it. I think in that context, confidence without any evidence to back a statement like that up would be sort of delusional or arrogant in a certain way. But confidence in what you're saying is sort of where my mind goes, is like belief in self. And what comes first, the chicken or the egg? This is this conversation. But like, I went from a totally unconfident, overweight guy, and I took maybe a sliver of confidence that I had and was able to turn it into, and I have been able to turn it into more over time. And, maybe you could argue that I took that little confidence and turned it into something, or I had none and I made something from nothing. I don't really know. That might be a deep conversation that we would have to dive into in an episode of its own. But like, I'm kind of more in line with what you're thinking of. There needs to exist some level of confidence for you to take on any task, to build evidence. I think evidence helps, right? The more you do and the more you back it up,
Yeah, I still, even like what you're saying is, you took a confidence that you had in yourself and you had like, there's probably the way I'm thinking about it, there was probably some evidence to give you that confidence. The more I sit here and think about that statement, the more I still think, I'm going to, two different experiences in my life that I'll kind of liken it to. One, in the military, they'll say something like false motivation is better than no motivation. So basically it would be likening it to say, fake it till you make it. Right. And there's just real power in that. I've seen it time and time again, where maybe I had zero confidence, like maybe I didn't even believe that I could, but I basically just, somehow faked it, and all of a sudden it happened. And so I've seen that. And then I went to a seminar called the Landmark Forum, which is, it's a self-development, a personal development kind of organization. And one of the things that's just resonated with me for all the years since then is something they say is like, you are who you say you are. And so you have to be really careful about how you speak to yourself and how you speak about yourself. And I really do believe that if I say I am blank, I am whatever I say I am, I don't need to have evidence. I think we become, whatever, if you listen to Dr. Joe Dispenza, from a biochemical standpoint, we create the juice inside of ourselves to become that thing. But also you just start acting like that thing. You know, if you start saying you are that, there needs to be no evidence, in my opinion. There doesn't even have to be real confidence. It can just be like, I am this. And if you consistently say that about yourself, you are much more likely to become that.
I think, though, in that formula of something that's good to point out, though, is like there's a relationship there of belief in self and actual becoming or being. And it probably doesn't matter which one comes first, whether you running 100 miles makes you realize that you're tough, or saying I'm tough and then running 100 miles. There is a connectedness there that needs to exist. You probably can't have confidence over the course of a life. There's probably no confidence if there's no action, and there's probably no action if there's no confidence.
Complete agreement there. Performance is action. You can't perform at all in any way, shape, or form without having some sort of action with it. So there can't be just like this thing I say about myself and then I never do anything, you know?
This one's also from Hormozy. A lot more people would be advanced if they actually did the beginner shit they think they're too good for.
100% agreement with that. I'm a firm believer. And again, I've been able to observe, I've been fortunate enough to be around people who are elite at a lot of different things. And what they do better than anybody is they just do the basic shit better than anybody else. And they do it repeatedly better than anybody else. And so I'm a firm believer in that.
I think that novelty and seeking novelty is a beginner's mistake. It's something that I say a lot to coaches that I develop. It's like you are being distracted by trying to do clapping push-ups with your eyes closed and press into a handstand. You know, like look at the main things and figure out what that is, figure out every single little detail, and then continue to develop it forever and ever and ever. And then you're going to die and you're still not going to be done.
It's a classic. It's so funny you mentioned, because I've talked to many of my coaches that I've trained over time as well. It's a classic rookie coach mistake to want to show everybody this higher level, look at what I know. I know this little niche bit of information or this crazy, technical movement or whatever.
Just so they can demonstrate it.
Yeah. And it's like, yeah, exactly. And once I think the master coaches, and this is not just, we're talking kind of fitness right now, but like, the sage, even from ancient philosophers, they'll say, I knew how little I knew when I started to learn more. And there's a level of humility around just kind of like knowing the basics, not getting too caught up in, these tangents of advancement, whatever that means.
Yeah. I find that this podcast conversation and others on the show are that. It's just reminding me over and over and over again in somebody's vocabulary what it is to be good and not be an asshole. And whether we're talking about it in this context or that context, it's just like 5 basic principles, or a very low number of principles that I'm going to forget if I don't have the conversation.
Yeah, it's not sexy. I mean, like when you ask people, I listen to you, I ask people about this question, and the answers are never, it's like, there's never anything that like blows your mind or anything like that. Really. It's like, it's like, don't be mean to other people. It's just basic stuff,
Yeah. Chris Williamson, he's somebody that I really admire and look up to from a podcasting perspective. We try to do a lot of things. There's the quote, good artists copy, great artists steal. Yep. I try to steal as much stuff from him as I can. But this is actually on social media and sort of the state of the world. He said, the gap between words and actions has never been bigger. You can be the least virtuous, meanest, most dishonest human on earth. But if you say the right things on social media, the world will be unaware.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's that's what everyone talks about with social media, right? I mean, that's where like, And the opposite is true. There's a lot of people who say horrible things, mean things, just outrageous things on social media, and they're really a nice person. They're I don't know what, they had a moment or whatever. And so it goes back and forth, but I really do think there's so many beautiful and amazing things that come out of social media. I'm really grateful that we have the platforms that we have now. And the trade-off is people can just say some just stuff that isn't true. They don't even think like that. And it's funny that you said earlier, one of the quotes that you said, I wrote it. The fact that I don't remember writing it, and I went through a phase like that. And then probably you started digging some of this stuff up where I was like almost every single day posting my thoughts and posting my things that I was reading about or whatever I was contemplating. And not that any of those things were negative. I think I was trying to say good things. I was trying to be a good person, but like we just, I was also probably going through a phase of like dealing with my ego of trying to like say, hey, look at me, look what I know, look how virtuous I am, and really I think that's it's a lower state of being, in my opinion.
Yeah. The thing in relation to this that I've been giving thought to is what am I doing? Like I'm going to post clips from this podcast to promote it so people look at my page and then click on my podcast and listen to it. And right, I say this is a genuine, and it is. I hope that this podcast makes a very positive impact. I love doing it. I would love to be able to do it for as long as I guess I want to, right? I would love to have the capability to make money from this and to be able to have these conversations all the time and have the notoriety to ask whoever I want to come on the show. But then am I becoming the very thing that I constantly talk on here about that is evil to me and that I hate,
Yeah.
I'm just like everybody else. I get pulled into social media. I get wrapped up in the idea of people listening to the words that I have to say. And I just find more and more recently, especially since doing this show, I'm getting better at just sort of putting it out there and then retracting. And then maybe I'll just be like, how'd this post do? Or what are the analytics on the show? But I'm consuming less, I think, which is good.
Yeah. And I think, it's like you have to go through this process. I think no matter what field you're in, industry you're in, what you're trying to achieve, it's like, this is the way to get there. And I like what Chris said in that it's the action. It goes back to what we said before, also the evidence, like Hormozy said, and then Chris talked about the action, right? And I guess the challenge to you is you're on here talking to good people. You're, the action is learning from it and being a good person, and paying it forward, I think.
You're going to really love this one. I actually put it on because I knew you'd love it. We've talked about this. It's also from Chris Williamson. Give a man a purpose and the ability to achieve it, and he will crawl over broken glass with a smile.
Yeah. I mean, you dished that one up for me. That's a lot. That's a softball pitch for me because it's like, that's what I'm all about. Like ultimately what I do. And if there's anything that I can honestly say that I talk about and I give a lot of action to in my life and through what I help other people do is to find purpose. Every problem, every issue you have with yourself and others, for the most part, will be resolved and taken care of when you have a true north. You have a stake in the ground that you're marching towards, that you have purpose. It doesn't even have to be I've had 5 purposes in my life. I've changed my purposes over and over. It doesn't have to be, I don't think you're born with a purpose personally. I think you get to, going back to the comment about choices, I think you get to choose what you want to be marching towards. But at the end of the day, you have to, I guess for your show, even part of being a good person, I think is having a strong sense of purpose and what you're trying to contribute to something bigger than yourself.
Yeah, one of the reasons why I wanted to include this in is I've reflected a lot on that idea since you and I have talked, however many times we've talked. It's probably come up every single time I've chatted with you, both on the podcast and at dinner and on the phone. And 100%, purpose drives action more than most anything. But I think that most of the things that I've done in my life have been me running away from something as opposed to running towards something. Now, I think me doing my 100-miler, the goal of that was to sort of inspire myself and inspire more confidence. And I felt as though when I was doing it, it very much to me was evidence that I am a tough person and I want to become more confident in this way. Because at the time, a lot of my reflections were on this idea that what am I good at in life? And my answer to that was I figured out how to go from not being confident to being confident. And I'm still very young. I'm sure I'm going to go through a whole bunch of other phases and things. But I knew at that point that that's something that I know how to do. It's how to become confident. And so it was very clear to me that when I was running my 100-miler, this was this hard thing that I at some level I didn't want to do, but I knew deep down would be another one of those confidence building things. And so that was towards something. But a lot of times I feel like in a lot of ways, it may be even stronger to be running away from something than to be running towards something. I don't want to be this. I don't want to be that. I think a lot about that with like financially and with thinking about buying a house. I want my kids to be in a house that is nice and they don't worry about financial situation. They have something to eat. The thought of that happening is scary enough that it propels me,
I mean, that's still purpose, right? Like, I don't think it's not, purpose. I think we spend, our life happens in stages. We spend the early stages of our lives, some people will say up until 13, like basically being conditioned and basically life happening to you and you being kind of like up by it, what your parents did to you, what some bully at the playground did to you or whatever. And then you spend another 10 years past that, basically trying to become the opposite of that feeling that you had while you were having those problems. So you'd really develop this like personality. And then hopefully, we get past that and we start to realize how we were running from a pain rather than like being who we are or thinking about all the possibilities of what we're capable of. And so hopefully in your later stages of life, which unfortunately I'm getting into the later stages of my life, you start to kind of realize that like, okay, I can let all this brokenness and all this fear and all this insecurity go. And I can just really choose something that's like a true, that doesn't have to be related to something, a pain that I have or anything like that. It can just really be out of the pure field of possibility. And I could pick a purpose that excites me and contributes. It can't be just for me. It has to be for other people. And, I think that's just part of the phases of life.
It's kind of crazy how fluidly this conversation has gone with the quotes that I wrote. And I'll just jump right into the next one because it's kind of what we're talking about. This is Mark Manson. Have you read a lot of Mark Manson?
He did the one about your life or something like that.
Yeah, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F***. And
there you go.
We've said a lot in this episode.
I'm sorry if I'm not supposed to cuss. Just
no, dude, you cuss all you want.
Okay.
F words are the only one that we bleep out, just because we're not sure yet. We're still sort of, but we leave everything else in.
Well, I read that book, The Subtle Art.
Yeah, thank you. And then the other one is what you said, unquack yourself,
Yeah.
I think we use a quack. Is that right? Yeah, I think we use a quack. Anyway, he said, when we force ourselves to stay positive at all times, we deny the existence of our life's problems. And when we deny our problems, we rob ourselves of the chance to solve them and generate happiness. Problems add a sense of meaning and importance in our life. Thus, to duck our problems is to lead a meaningless, even if supposedly pleasant, existence.
Yeah. I mean, I love that quote. I don't remember reading that or I haven't heard that from him specifically, but it's my personal opinion that really the truly most evolved way of being, the highest way of being is the goal should not to be happy all the time, to have joy all the time. I mean, that's fake and that's not real. I think the real goal should be to have access to all the emotions at the appropriate times, and also have the skill to not have to stay there for any prolonged, inordinate amount of time. Like, you shouldn't be happy at inappropriate times. Like, if your pet just died, or a loved one, or something something troubling happened to you, you're not supposed to be happy about it. You're not supposed to be positive about it. Maybe you can be positive, but you know what I mean? You want to have access to all your emotions at the appropriate times, because that's real. That's vulnerability, and that's healthy. That's what I consider to be the healthiest way of being.
Similarly, in line with thinking of, I'm at getting to a point in my life where I'm starting to make decisions now about like where do I want to settle down here? Like, am I going to buy a house? These are big decisions. And, that's something that I've really been leaning into, is like, oh, I told you I'm a worrier. Obviously, these are things that I'm worried about, but I'm just kind of leaning into that of like, oh, this is how I am, and this is how I act, and this is how I feel. And this kind of does suck, and it is stressful, but it makes me feel so much better when I just acknowledge that.
Yeah. I mean, being nervous or worried about something is not a bad thing. It means that you care. It means that you take it seriously. It means that you're not just kind of haphazardly looking over that particular issue. It's like going into a competition of any kind, or a test, or whatever. If you're not nervous at all, do you even care? Are you even trying?
Yeah. Challenge yourself to find the good and beautiful thing inside of everyone. It's there. It's your job to find it, not their job to show you. That's another one of Mark Manson's.
Mm-hmm. That sounds a lot like Ram Dass too, where it's having a true compassion for other people. It's like being able to put your, all the quotes, the cliches of like putting yourself in someone else's shoes, or you hear that there's a lot about like other humans are your mirrors. And so I think that's the real challenge. And that's what I try to do. Anybody who's, I have a lot of staff. I have a lot of people, hundreds of clients and things like that. And challenges come up, interpersonal challenges come up quite a bit. And I can, when I'm being my lower self, I can easily start to judge someone's character, but the truth is that I've been that way. I've shared those things, and really mostly people are good people. We have bad moments. We have hard times, so I think I love that quote. It's just really trying to see the beauty in everybody, having a lot of compassion for what it's like to be them.
Just being empathetic, like if you were able to zoom out and see everybody's life from the time they were born to where they are now, and you saw the circumstances they were born in, the decisions that they made, the logical conclusion puts them exactly where they are. Like, that's a silly, stupid, obvious thing to say, but if you were them, you would be them, And so I think just having that perspective is there's no reason that you are who you are. There's no reason. You got lucky. What is it? 1 in 400 trillion. I don't know if that's accurate, but that's what they say.
Yep.
There's no reason you are who you are, and you could have easily just been somebody else. And so remember that next time you respond to somebody's comment on social media, or you flick somebody off in the car, or you honk your horn, whatever. You could easily have been them. You probably were doing something they were doing at some other point in your life, or maybe you will. And so I think it's good to remember that.
Yeah, I think it's like when something triggers you, when someone does something that like really pisses you off, I would argue that it's probably because you see a part of yourself in them that you dislike. And it's kind of like it sets you up. Because sometimes people have behaviors, you don't think about it. It doesn't bother you at all because, you don't really identify with that at all. But sometimes someone will do something and it just really bothers you. And it's most likely because it is a mirror for you, and you kind of see yourself in that.
Yeah. One of the things about being a good person that I know for sure, and I always joke and I say there's like 5 things. I actually have never thought about that enough to know that it's 5 things. But if there are 5 things, one of them is honesty, and it's in line with what we're talking about. Be honest with yourself and be honest with others. Things that happen to you, things that you say, things that you're thinking, be honest about all those things. And I think the biggest piece of that is being honest with yourself of like, I could have done that on under the right circumstances. I could have done those things that that I'm angry about that this person did to me.
Yeah. Another spin on this whole thing. I, a while back, went through a form of therapy with a therapist who is called internal family systems. And what they kind of talk about is that you develop your personality basically based on you create characters inside of you, usually wounded type children, small children types, and then they kind of become a part of your personality. So anytime I'm acting out as a person in any form that might be perceived as negative or another person is, most likely it's kind of like a wounded child inside of them. And when I think, I can just speak for myself. When I think about that for other people, I can have a lot more kind of love and compassion for that person because I'm like, oh, it must really suck to have that wounded child inside of you that's kind of like screaming out in this way now as an adult, and I can kind of be more empathetic about it.
Was that with Jen Patterson, Dr. Jen
Yeah.
Patterson?
Yeah.
I actually have her booked in October to do this show.
No way. She's amazing. She's such a good guest. I'm so glad you booked her.
I'm excited to dig into that. Like I listened to that episode that you have on your show, and I'm super fascinated by it, and I think my audience will like it too.
Yeah, she's amazing.
I said that super like posh, my audience, whatever.
Yeah. Well,
like
you have an audience, bro. You're 22 episodes in.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know if I told you this. I feel like we can include this on the episode because it's booked and it's going to happen. And I booked a Wall Street weightlifter on the show.
What? Now, was it? Cool. Yeah. Did you just?
I just emailed him.
Yeah, I got so many guests that I didn't think I would get, honestly, just by that reaching out.
Yeah. Anyways, next one. We're getting close to the end here. This is another one for me. I'm sorry if you're listening. I'm sorry. But I want to be honest in that way. It's me. I'm not trying to say I'm super wise and profound or anything like that. I just think sometimes I put something on Threads and I'm like, that was fire. I got to remember that.
Well, not only that, but it's good to get feedback, right? Like you're putting your ideas and concepts out there. And the only way that you kind of like grow them and like foster and develop them is by checking in with what people think about it. So,
and good. This is by no means a new idea at all. Everybody's heard this, but the way that it's worded, just so poetic. It is. One of the greatest tragedies one can suffer is allowing fear to inhibit action. Be scared, but do not, under any circumstance, let it stop you from trying.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that one is fire because honestly, we spend so much time being afraid of shit. All the time. We're afraid of what this person's going to say. We're afraid that we might fail. We're afraid of so many things. And it really does. The real shame of that, there's no problem with being afraid. Again, because I just said we're almost all, some of the toughest people I've ever met in my life. Again, I've spent a lot of time with true warriors, like legitimate people you would not want to meet in a dark alley. And what I've learned about them is they're more afraid than anybody. The reason why they are that way is because they've guarded themselves of all their fear and hurt and all this other stuff. So the only tragedy of the fear is that it keeps you from moving forward. So I love how you said that.
I just have realized that I've lived most of my life afraid. Like I'm a worrier. That's like fear to me, is just being afraid of the future. And that word shame is, I would not wish shame upon anybody. That is a horrible feeling. And I think one of the benefits of being honest is freeing yourself of shame, because whether it's about sharing things that happen to you or anything like that, being honest about it, it doesn't take it away from you. Like those things still happen to you, or you still thought those things or did those things. But now that people know, you can't feel shame from it anymore. It's you in a way free yourself from that. I think that's what honesty gives you. It doesn't take away fear, but it takes away shame.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, that reminds me of like something that like Brene Brown would say, that, it's the expression. It's like what I just mentioned, a lot of us live in fear all the time, constantly. The real, the expression of that fear, the sharing of it, the communication through honesty that you just mentioned is what frees you from it. And really empowers you to, once you realize that, it's a common feeling and that other people can, will support you when you've expressed that fear. It helps you to move forward and do. I mean, what I want for all people in my life is do amazing things. I want everybody in my life to go out there and do what they feel like is like amazing for them. And that requires them to overcome fear and insecurity and maybe shame.
Yeah. I couldn't have done this episode without putting some Ryan Holiday in here.
Okay.
I tried to pick ones that weren't cliche Ryan Holiday, the ones everybody chooses. Try to pick some novel ones. He said, "What is known can't jerk us around unwittingly. Before anything can be resolved, the implicit must be made into the explicit." That's another one that kind of went with the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think about when you hear that?
Sort of the same thing. You can't suffer in silence. If you tell somebody, you can fix it. And it's nothing more than that, of like something that I was going to add on before moving on to what you just said previously, was getting back to the social media thing. I can open up to people in my life about stuff and I don't have to post it on social media. Like when I started this podcast, that was something I was fearful of. Like there's things and stuff that I've thought that if one of the things that I believe is honesty, at some point I'm going to have to share it with people. Like I'm going to have to say it in this microphone to whoever I'm talking to. And you don't. Like I've told my girlfriend, and when this episode comes out, she'll be my fiance. I hate that word, by the way. I'm never going to use fiance. It's just super smug to me, man. I don't know. There's just something about that word. I don't
That's
like
the
it.
word. That's the one that gets you. That's off limits.
We'll be engaged. My future wife.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I've told her stuff that I will never say to anybody else ever. And I'm free of that, like I'm good. It doesn't hold me down. It doesn't bother me. Stuff that weighed on me heavily. And I don't have to say it on social media. I don't have to do whatever. I made the implicit explicit in a way, right? I think there's a little bit of a different take that he was getting at, but that's sort of where my brain goes when I read that.
Well, I like what you said, because I don't think like there's absolutely no requirement of being an honest person. That means not everyone in your life has earned the right and the trust to hear, what you're saying. Certainly I do appreciate people who unapologetically share all their stuff and like kind of with no insecurity or shame, but I still think that that's probably still a defense mechanism. Like they give it all to you so that they can, basically you can't say something about them or whatnot. But I think you don't even really need a person to be explicit about what's going on with you. There's a lot of ways. You could do it in poetry. You could do it in your journal. It could be in you don't actually have to share it with somebody. But I think for you to move past something as a person, you have to be aware of it. Awareness is the most important piece of growth. And if you aren't explicitly aware of it, even if you've never told anybody, even just within your own self, you've made it kind of explicit, then, I think that's the most important part.
I think that's one that I'll probably have to ponder a bit longer before I sort of wrap my head around it. But I think that if anything, that shows the benefit of, to your point, thinking about your life and your place in the world is awareness. Where am I? What am I doing? Etc. This next one is also Ryan Holiday. It's the last one that I have. I don't know how I feel about this, but courage is something that I think is important too. And kind of like what we've been getting at, to be honest, to do something scary, it takes courage to be willing to take the step and start the thing. And so this quote's about courage. Courage calls each of us differently, at different times, in different forms, but in every case it is, as they say, coming from inside the house.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it goes back to your fear statements, right? I think that was from Courage is Calling, his book, Courage is Calling, which is a great book. And I think it goes back to that voice, that fear that we all experience is simply a voice in our head, and which is inside our house. And the true courage is not, and we know this is a common quote, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward and taking the appropriate action in spite of being afraid. And I think that's what he's talking about there, is that you hear that voice. Maybe, and it's simple, simple example. When I wasn't courageous recently, I was at the swimming pool where I live, and there was a couple there who had a couple drinks, and I could tell they were having an issue, and it wasn't like there was no domestic violence or anything. Like, there was nothing where I felt like I really needed to step in. Like, obviously if he was grabbing her or anything like that, I would have stepped in, but I could tell something was up. And in my heart and in my mind, I was like, maybe I should just go make sure she's okay. And I didn't. I did not do that. And then that night, while I was walking my dog, cops were out in front of his house, and the ambulance was there. And it turns out that he had ended up hurting her. And when I check in with myself, I don't think I did anything wrong. Like, I didn't turn a blind eye to something that was obviously wrong, but I also wasn't courageous enough to the voice inside of me, inside my house, that said, maybe you should just check in here, And so that's what that quote kind of makes me think about.
That's heavy, man. I think part of being good too is that voice, whoever's it is. I've never understood that. Everybody always says, who's that voice inside your head? Some people say it's their mom or whatever. I've always felt like it's my own voice. I'm sure people feel differently, but I think one of the goals of life, is to start getting as close to doing and thinking what that voice does and thinks. If it says do that, and I go now and I do that, like, that makes you feel good. I've done, man, I have a similar story in that it's not as severe maybe, but off the top of my head, I remember probably 6 months ago, I was driving on one of the main roads in town here, and there was just this stray dog walking on the sidewalk by itself. And I was like, I should stop and like get the dog and then do the whole thing of putting it on social media and seeing if I could find it and taking it to the shelter. And then I had a super busy day, and I was like, I can't do it. Like, I can't do that right now. And in reality, I probably could have figured out how to make it work. And I mean, I still think about that sometimes. It doesn't, I don't like feel bad about it, but sometimes I think back to that experience of like, I wasn't in line with what I thought the right thing to do was. And so I think that last line, inside the house, is what stands out to me, because we all have that. We all know it. We might not be able to define it, but you feel what that means. And I think that becoming in line with that thing inside of you is maybe not the goal, but important, and it feels good.
Yeah, I think going back to your shame comment, because I hadn't really thought much about shame, but like, I think I agree with what you said about there's probably no worse feeling than shame. And anytime that I felt shame, it was really related to that. I had I knew inside of myself what needed to be done, and I didn't do it. And I feel shame about that. And I think that, going back to what you said, maybe the highest way of being is to really being in touch with and clearing out all the clutter and being able to know what your heart or your spirit or whatever, people have different terms for it, but and really being way more in line with that, regardless of, oh, I'm supposed to be at work in 5 minutes, or someone else is expecting, it's all these social constraints and all these things outside of us that we're more worried about than what is actually really important, which is inside of us.
Dude, this has been awesome. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, man. I love you found some like really good topics to talk about, and it's been super fun.
I think this was a pretty solid episode, and I'm grateful that you were the first person to come back on twice. I'm sure you'll probably be on 3 or 4 or 5 more times. But before we wrap up, where can people find more from you and the content that you're putting out?
The best way is follow my Instagram at Athan Schindler, Athan, like Nathan without the first N. Schindler's like Schindler's List. I pretty much share everything through there. So if you follow me there, you'll see all my various things that I'm involved with.
Very good, man. We'll leave it there.
All right, man. Well, I appreciate you.
You got it, man. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Yep. Have a good one.
Thank you guys so much for listening to this week's episode of Good People. Being that today's episode was a different format, please give us some feedback on what you thought. You can actually leave comments on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, or you can use the YouTube comment section below. If you are watching on YouTube, please like, comment, and subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. If you really enjoyed it, you can share the episode with somebody you love, perhaps your grandma. We'll see you next time.